Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to try to get us started almost on time here. We know that at 7:30 is a tip-off, and some people are going to be eager to do that as well tonight. But I really appreciate so many people coming out for what I see as a really important community conversation. As there's plenty of seats over here, and as people are coming in to join us, I see we're joined tonight by City Councilor Karen Paul. We have City Councilor Sarah Moore as well, and I know other City Councilors are planning on joining us. Up here with me, we have Chief Brandon Del Pozo, Steve Leffler, who is the Chief Medical Officer for the University of Vermont Medical Center, Selena Colburn, who is also a city councilor for another 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks. No, almost 2.5 weeks, right? And also is now a state legislator and has been working on a range of opioid-related bills in Montpelier. And I'm also really pleased tonight that Sarah George could join us. Sarah, if you haven't met her yet, she's a new face on the scene. She is our recently appointed state's attorney. I want to get us started with just a few opening remarks, and then Chief Del Pozo will walk us through a series of slides that we've developed over the last number of months that I think characterize the opioid epidemic here in Vermont and in Chittenden County. And then we're going to hear briefly from Selena, Steve, and Sarah. And then as quickly as we can, we want to open it up to you and start taking questions. And then as we get towards the end of the evening, we'll try to wrap things up. We gather tonight in the teeth of a massive opioid epidemic for the city, for the state, for the entire country. In 2008 was the first year that overdose deaths, mostly opioid-related overdose deaths, became the leading cause of accidental deaths in the United States. And here in Vermont and across the nation, those deaths have continued to climb. We just in recent weeks had a formal report that 105 people died of overdoses, opioid-related overdoses in Vermont in 2016, and that is a huge increase over the prior year, a 38% increase. The chief will go through some additional numbers on how we are seeing this problem intensify here in Burlington. I think what is even more, as disturbing as these numbers are, what makes them even more troubling in some sense is that these numbers are continuing to rise despite massive attention by so many different people in the state, an enormous amount of hard work that has clearly saved lives, but has not turned this around. It is now 3 years since the Governor Shumlin focused all of us on this growing problem by devoting his entire State of the State address to the issue. And in that time, we've seen a lot of change. Maybe most strikingly, we have seen the ubiquitous deployment of naloxone to our first responders in Burlington, both our police and our firefighters carry naloxone. I see we have Fire Chief Steve Locke here as well. And that kind of push of the naloxone, this life-saving drug that can literally bring people back from the brink of death from overdoses, that has been done statewide. And clearly that has been one of the factors that has kept overdoses from rising even further. There was I believe it was more than 150 saves that we know of using naloxone in 2016, or that number would have been even higher. And there's a lot of saves that we don't know about because we've also pushed naloxone out to people who are suffering from addictions and their families as well. And so many of these recoveries take place behind closed doors. Despite this incredible focus and massive effort, we are still seeing these issues rise, overdoses rise, and the problem intensify. Beyond the numbers, I feel the crisis, and I know many of you do, and that's why you're here, in the just incredible number of heartbreaking stories that we routinely see. I have had employees as well as friends share stories of having lost loved ones. My wife, who used to teach kindergartner teachers, now knows multiple students who are in recovery, kids that she never would have imagined would suffer from addictions. And I feel the crisis, like I'm sure many of you do, just as my girls get older. We have an 11-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I feel unequipped to tell them how to avoid opioid addiction and how to stay clear of this terrible these terrible problems that people who develop addictions end up feeling. Personally, my work around opioids began before I was mayor. I was on the board of the Turning Point Center for Chittenden County, an organization a couple blocks from here that helps people deal with addictions of all types through 12-step recovery programs. And I kind of carried that interest into this office 5 years ago. My work, the city's work, in a lot of ways, really intensified around opioid addictions about 18 months ago. That was when, on September 1st, Chief Del Pozo joined us, and publicly that day, I asked him as his first order of business to review the city's response to the opioid epidemic. And us gathering here tonight flows directly from that review and what he uncovered and what we set out to do. One of the things that we've done, and I want to recognize that right away, is we have created in the city an opioid policy manager position. Jackie Corbally, who is here with us, maybe Jackie, you could stand up and just so everyone can see you, is been with us since the fall and is helping to coordinate this city response and the response with many partners. We are also here tonight out of the experience that we had as a city working with Steve Loeffler, the governor's office, the then state's attorney, TJ Donovan, and others, Howard Center, as we tried to wrestle with and come to terms with this massive waiting list that we had for treatment about 18 months ago. The treatment, Steve knows the numbers better than me and may speak to them, but we had more than 600 people on that waiting list at that time, and they were waiting 12 months to get a treatment on average. And those numbers have come down quite substantially since then, in part because of the work that we did together. But it's still unacceptably long, and we'll speak more to that tonight, I'm sure. But the numbers have come down, as some slides in a moment will show. In that time, really what I'm describing here is that responding to the opioid crisis has become a major area of focus for the city. It's one of the things that our office is spending more time on than just about anything else, and it has become this substantial new function of the police department and the city. So, that really brings us 2 points from that. One is that brings us to, I've learned some things over that I want to share with you, and then it also leads us to why we are doing tonight's event. I've come to understand in the work on this that opioid addictions can affect anyone. This is a disease that does not respect gender, race, socioeconomic class divisions. People have become addicted of all backgrounds. At the same time, it is clearly a very serious equity issue that we face in this community, in this state. We know that the people who are most impacted by this, disproportionately impacted, are the most vulnerable in this community. We know that when we look at maps of the country and we see where the addiction and overdose rates are highest, and we know it just by knowing who's on this waiting list. The people on the waiting lists are people with limited economic means who can't get the help they need and don't have the financial options to get the help. I've come to understand that the city, perhaps uniquely, certainly has a unique role to play in turning around this crisis, we have a unique role in being able to, I believe, coordinate broad number of efforts, and because we are the level of government that is closest to the problems and faces it most directly, the city has a key responsibility. And a final thing that I've really come to believe deeply about this is government, nonprofit efforts alone are not going to turn this problem around. We really are in this mess because of deep societal problems, and we are going to need real cultural change to turn it around. We are going to need everyone, or many people at least, to think differently about their role as a patient. They need to think differently about their roles as parents and as active members of the community. That is what it's going to take to muster the effort necessary to finally turn the numbers in the right direction. The three goals we have for tonight are this. First of all, after this 18 months of really focused, serious effort, we want to report out to you what the city is doing, the variety of initiatives that we have underway. We want to get your feedback on that, and we want to share with you what we're doing. We particularly are interested in your feedback in what we are calling the city's 11 opioid principles. And those principles are printed out, and they are on the back wall in big pieces of paper, and I think most of you, I see, have the yellow pieces of paper with them as well. These are draft principles that we are looking to finalize with the City Council. There's already gone through quite a bit of review by stakeholders before getting to this point, but we wanted to open it up to a broader discussion before we finalize these points. And we see them as important because this is going to be a long-term effort. This is going to be a multi-year slog to turn this crisis around, and we don't know all the answers today. We don't know what all the initiatives and solutions will be. We think we are on to the principles for the solution, and we want to make sure we got that right so that they can inform not just where we are today, but where we go from here in future initiatives. And then our final goal for tonight is, I hope all of you who have taken the time to come here and be part of this conversation, leave, if you don't already have it, leave with more tools, more understanding of what you individually can do to help us through this challenge. With that, I would like to turn the floor over to Chief Del Pozo to lay out in some more detail the problem as we see it and share his own remarks. Then again, very briefly, we're going to hear from each of the three speakers, and then we'll open the mics. When we do open the mics for questioning, we're going to ask you to come up and get in line behind these two microphones here, and we will alternate between microphones and get to as many questions as we can. With that, Chief, take it away.
Thank you. I'd like to thank everybody for coming tonight. I see so many familiar faces in the audience, but I see a lot of folks I've never met before, and that's really encouraging because that means we're getting a good cross-section of the population here to talk about this important issue. I'll start by saying two things briefly, not on these slides. One is that there's no shortage of prescription opioids available in our community. It's my belief, and every bit of data that we've clawed to get our hands on has shown that there's an excess of prescription opioids in Vermont, and take it from a chief of police, there's also an excess of black market heroin in Vermont. So that's something I think that we have the research to back up, but we can let pass without further comment. What we can say is that it's killing more people than ever. To put it in perspective, New York City is in complete crisis mode with the understanding that its opioid death rate is 4 times its homicide rate. Our opioid death rate hovers anywhere from 10 to 20 times our homicide rate. So it's the most profound cause of death in Vermont, and that's just primary cause of death. If you do secondary and tertiary, that 105 becomes many times that number. So when you hear the number 105, that's just where the medical examiner can definitively say that that is the primary number one cause of death in a person in terms of accident. So this puts in perspective where we've been through 2015. You can see that the New England data stops short of 2016, but we know what the Vermont data is. We can see that thanks to naloxone and education and Good Samaritan laws, we were able to stay below the New England death rate, but we really swung for the fences last year. We impute that it goes from about 17% per 100,000 to 23 per 100,000. And we don't know where the rest of New England's going to go, but we know that we're definitely headed in a direction that is getting not just worse, but much worse at an alarming rate. So that is the death rate for Vermont. Next slide. Sorry, you know where to go with that. Compared nationally, you can see that, again, the nation's in an uptick. The red is the nation. Vermont is is in gray. We're waiting for the rest of the country to come in. But you can see as well that nationally we're also headed like in a very alarming direction. Sorry. This is overdose data for the city of Burlington. You can see that from 2012 to 2016 and into 2017, our overdose calls for service just by volume are marching steadily upward. They look like the returns on a Ponzi scheme. And then if you look at BPD calls for overdose assignments from the days in between calls for overdoses, it's steadily marching downward. So what you can take out of these two things is that calls for overdose assistance are going up, and then the days in between calls are going down. They're now basically an every day or every other day occurrence. And then this shouldn't surprise anyone, but heroin sales and possession are also steadily marching upwards. So we're not just looking at like a 1-year spike or a 2-year spike. We're looking at a relentless multi-year trend. All the indicators that we have are all going in the wrong direction at alarming rates for several years standing without relent. On the other hand, we're seeing a few promising things, but there's a lot to unpack that'll be unpacked by others tonight. One is that the number of people in treatment, which is a good sign in my opinion, is steadily going up. We have to parse whether we're getting enough people into treatment. This may be a decreasing percentage of the total number of people who need it, but there are more people than ever seeking treatment every day. And we have a waiting list. You'll see that one of our principles is that people should be able to receive treatment in the right type of treatment for opioid abuse without delay, meaning when they're ready for it, they're in treatment by the end of the day or early the next day. We don't have that. We have a waiting list, and it disproportionately affects people who don't have access to affluent means like leaving the state or flying somewhere or sending a loved one to a place outside of Vermont where there isn't a waiting list. But here in Chittenden County, we dominate the state's waiting list, and it has been going down. It's gone down from over 500 to over 191. When you see that 191, that's 191 people who month after month renew their commitment to being on a wait list. It doesn't count people who drop off the wait list. It doesn't count people who don't even decide to apply for the wait list because they think it'll be fruitless. So these are good indicators, but there's a lot to unpack. And eventually, I think I'm not the only one to say that one of our goals is to have that wait list go down to that waitlist time go down to 0. So those are the slides for the police department. And just very brief introduction because we want to hear from you folks tonight, but that's kind of where things stand from a law enforcement perspective.
Great. I want to just take a moment to recognize some other people in the room that we've been joined by that are an important part of this effort. We have Kathy Aikman from the Chittenden County Opioid Alliance here with us tonight. Kathy is heading up that initiative, which has a steering committee made up of some of the major stakeholders in the community and has been a partner in this intensifying effort over the last 18 months. I also see that we have here tonight Jalinda LeClaire, who has been recently appointed by Governor Scott to head up the governor's efforts in this area. We really appreciate you being here tonight, Jalinda. I see we also have Chip Mason, City Councilor from the South End, joining us. And with that, let's go to our City Councilor up here, Selena Colburn, to speak a little bit about the efforts she's pursuing in Montpelier.
Well, thank you very much. And I'm a city councilor for another 2.5 weeks here, but also a freshman legislator in Montpelier in the House of Representatives, representing a neighborhood in Burlington. And the first time I ran for public office actually was just I started going door to door just days after Governor Shumlin's State of the State address on this topic. And many of my constituents wanted to know, what is the role of a city? What is our role as a state in addressing this crisis? And it wasn't an issue that I had worked on a lot. So I came here to City Council and started trying to learn as much as I could, as quickly as I could, from a lot of people in this room, people like Tom and Grace at Safe Recovery, who are amazing, people who have been affected personally, and just there's a lot of people here tonight who are doing really incredible work on the front lines. But as I learned more, I have become increasingly concerned by our failure to get people ready access to treatment. And it's true there have been some really encouraging signs on the wait list, but as Chief Del Pozo said, our end goal has to be no wait list. If somebody is going to do the hard work of stepping up and saying they want to be in recovery, they should be able to access the proven treatment that is the gold standard for getting people into recovery. And we are pretty far from that. And so as a freshman legislator coming to Montpelier, part of the reason I ran was to really work on this issue. And it's been pretty eye-opening, I have to say, going into that building where I felt like I would have to be maybe elbowing people out of the way to do work on this issue. And that hasn't been the case. There's maybe a handful of bills moving through the building, only a couple that I know of that really are about treatment access. And it's been discouraging, frankly. But tonight I am really encouraged because I feel a sense of urgency in this room that I don't feel in that building. In Montpelier, I see people here who are working every day on this issue. I see people who have lost loved ones. I see people who are in recovery themselves. And I see people who really have a stake in this issue. And I I came of age in the 80s and 90s when we had an AIDS crisis and when I lost friends and teachers and mentors and loved ones to that disease, and I see a lot of similarities. That was a time when policymakers were not responding and we were letting people die. And that changed because people came together and were visible and were loud and were advocates. And I'm really hopeful that you in that room are going to come together in that way with me and with other people, and we are going to turn this around. So, to that effect, I have some actions that you can take if you want to when you leave here tonight. I have a bill, and I'm happy to talk about, when we get to questions or conversation, I'm happy to talk about some other bills that are moving through the building in Montpelier or not moving through, as the case may be. But I have a bill that I want to talk about tonight that aligns really directly with the city's opioid principles. It's H468. It's a bill that was introduced in the House. And what that bill says is that people who have been accessing medication-assisted treatment like Suboxone or methadone cannot be denied access to that treatment if they are placed in our correction system in Vermont. So currently, people are only allowed 30 days of access to those maintenance medications if they're placed in the correctional system. And if someone has been sentenced for longer than 30 days, they're just given no access whatsoever, which is unacceptable, in my opinion. People then access the illegal drug market in the prison, or they come out of prison at a hugely greater risk for overdose and fatal overdose. And people's end up back in prison. There's just study after study after study that shows this, and that shows us that medication-assisted treatment is very often someone's best bet. So I feel like it's inhumane that we are denying people access to this in our prison facilities. You know, someone might get arrested for possession, and by the time they get sentenced, they've managed to get into the hub or have managed to get access to Suboxone from a provider, and if they're going to do more than 30 days in one of those facilities, they go through detox, and it's a terrible experience, and they come out. I mean, I've heard stories from people in this room of people who have had exactly that experience and come out and died of a fatal overdose while desperately trying to access the treatment that they needed. So that is H468. It has not been taken up by the committee that is looking at it in Montpelier. It's been referred to the Committee on Institutions and Corrections. And if that sounds like an important bill to you, I have a piece of paper outside on the door, on the table out there that has information about the bill, has contact information for the committee chair. You can also look up all the members of the committee online on the webpage for the state legislature. And it would be great to have people advocate for this bill. So a lot of times we come together and we talk and we analyze, but if you're looking for a concrete action that you can take when you leave here, that's one. A second one is I want to see a coalition develop of advocates who are going to come together and make noise and demand change on this issue. And so on that same piece of paper, I've also placed my contact info, and if that's something you're interested in being a part of, I hope that you'll get in touch with me, and I'm committed to, when the legislature lets out, really spending my summer and fall trying to develop that coalition, so when the legislature is back in session next January, there will be no bills on this issue sitting, no good bills sitting on the wall in that building on this issue. So thank you.
Thank you, Selena. And I want to be clear that the city, I very much support this bill for treatment during incarceration as well. It is, in fact, very consistent with one of the opioid principles at the back of the room. It's also consistent with, I think, one of the most widely accepted statewide principles, maybe the only, one of the only things that we've really come to broadly accept, which is that opioid addictions should be treated as a public health crisis, not as a public health crisis with a law enforcement dimension, not as primarily a crime. And that also is memorialized in our principles. And I think it really flows directly from that if we are serious about this being a public health crisis, and this disease should be treated like other diseases. There should be treatment in prison as we have, generally speaking, treatment in prison for most other diseases. And if we really believe this is a crisis, and this is clearly something that goes at a vulnerable population that can address that crisis, we need to act with urgency on this. And I'm still hoping that the legislature does take up with urgency this topic before the end of the session. Another principle of ours is that all institutions engaged in resolving the opioid crisis should embrace data collection, data sharing, analysis, and transparency. And we have felt that one area very much in need of greater analysis, data analysis, and transparency has been the prescription system. It is broadly accepted, I think, at this point, that one of the factors that has created this crisis is a real dramatic change in the way prescribing practices were conducted in the 80s and the 90s. And we need to turn that around. We need to do so thoughtfully. There are appropriate times for the use of opioids. At the same time, these are dangerous substances, and they need to be treated that way. And we very much welcome the recent partnership with the UVM Medical Center focused on this transparency effort. And Steve Leffler, the Chief Medical Officer for the hospital, is here tonight and was going to speak to this and is available for questions throughout the evening.
Thank you, Moreau. So the University of Vermont Medical Center is really focused on 4 areas of how we're trying to address this crisis. So the first one is safe prescribing. So we have to do a good job of making sure people get just the right amount of medication and just the right kind for pain. We don't want to give too much, which has been an issue at times in the past, but also we don't want to give too little. There are certainly people who have severe pain that can be managed. So we want to do a good job, and we're doing a lot of work on that right now. The next area, equally as important, is that we're really trying to shift our mindset from addiction being some kind of problem with the individual to being a chronic illness. And if you think about it, we don't deny people who have diabetes medication. We don't deny people who have hypertension medication, even when they're incarcerated. They get those medications. And if you consider addiction to be a chronic illness, which many people do, then there's a medication or a couple medications that can really help that. So we're trying to shift that thinking. We've done a lot of work in our primary care offices to have them start considering addiction being a chronic illness. Once again, if you think about it from a chronic illness perspective, we don't deny people who have diabetes and put them on a wait list for 2 to 3 months or longer to get their treatment. So we're undergoing a lot of shift in our thinking on that, and I will tell you that we're committed to trying to get the wait list to 0, to giving all people who need treatment that day or the next day. We have a ways to go on that. And really, we should have all those people be seeing a primary care physician for their treatment when that makes sense, and having their treatment be given for as long as they need it. For some people, that'll be for life. For some people, they'll need it for less time, just like many other illnesses that we're very comfortable treating. The other 2 areas we're focused on is education, making sure that our prescribers, our physicians, our advanced practice providers, and our learners are learning how to safely prescribe all medications, including opiates. Not just giving out a big prescription, but what's the right amount, what's the right kind of medication. We're actually doing that throughout the state through some innovative programs to get out to all the offices throughout Vermont to help with that. And finally, focus on research. What are their options for prescribing for acute pain besides just opiates, alternative health, acupuncture, mindfulness? There's a lot of other things that can be done. We're working hard to give our providers and patients more options. And finally, research on addiction. How can we better treat addiction? There's some great work going on ways to get people immediate treatment, ways to give people long-acting treatments such as implantable medication-assisted therapy that lasts up to 6 months. There's great work. To that point, we are committed to being transparent in the work that we're doing. We are going to share data on our prescribing and in trends, how we're doing over time. So we'll be able to show a monthly report to show the number of prescriptions that we're writing, the average number of pills, and some data on what departments and specialties it's coming from. You do have to remember that Vermont's a small place, and to protect our patients and patients' identities, we'll probably have to aggregate this data. But I'm very confident that we can show you trends, the same as you saw from Chief Del Pozo, that shows that we are holding up our part in this crisis. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Steve. And then also part of that data initiative and a key partner for a long time in this effort is the state's attorney office, the Chittenden County State's Attorney. Very much welcome that Sarah George, in her just weeks on the job, has very strongly recommitted that office to staying absolutely engaged in a progressive way in this issue, and she is having the office step up in a new way to be part of the data collection effort in an important area where it's been lacking up until now. And Sarah, welcome you sharing a few words on that.
Can I use your mic? Thank you, Mayor. So if anybody doesn't know or didn't hear, I am the new state's attorney for Chittenden County. My name is Sarah George. Although I have only been in this position for about 2 months now, I was a deputy state's attorney in the Chittenden office for the last 6 years. So although this role and this title is new for me, the work and the topics are not. I am completely committed as the state's attorney to not only continue the programs that now Attorney General Donovan implemented in Chittenden, but grow them, strengthen them as much as possible, and also always looking for new programs and initiatives to combat the opioid crisis. Right now, the key kind of role I'm playing in the mayor's initiatives are that our office is the kind of common ground on untimely deaths, and we are the only, by statute, the only person that can release a body from a scene, and so we are called for every untimely death in Chittenden County. And so we have a kind of unique position to get somewhat more real numbers and more quick numbers of the people that are dying from overdoses. So I've now instructed my deputies to keep track of those deaths so that we can report them to this group of people that are working on it, and we can follow up later about whether or not it's the same as the medical examiner's office. But as Chief Del Pozo said, it may not always be, because they may list a different cause of death for the primary reason, but it's clear from the scene that a overdose is at least part of it. So we're committed to combating this opioid crisis, while also, as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, keeping the community safe and finding ways that we can balance the two. So thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Just to say one word more about why we really think this new information coming on a weekly basis from the state's attorney's office can be helpful. Up until now, there's been a substantial delay in the period of time between when an overdose death occurs and when the state reports it out. We still, I believe at this point, are not completely sure how many overdose deaths there were in Chittenden County in 2016. And those total death numbers have only been released basically up until now on a semi-annual basis. We believe the Department of Health is committed to releasing those more frequently now, but it certainly won't be on a weekly basis. We think this is really going to give us actionable, real-time information to know if there's some change occurring in the nature of the local opioid epidemic. We will perhaps have a better understanding if there are new opioids, more powerful opioids coming into Chittenden County in larger numbers in a way that could change the police response and response of other agencies. We think it's really going to be valuable information for us to focus on in this collaborative multi-agency effort that we call Community Stat, where we get dozens of different agencies around the table once a month to look at the data and try to chart out new and better ways of working together. We think it's going to be a key input to that effort that is still just getting going. We were just 4 months, we've had just 4 of those meetings, and we have another one coming up at the end of the month. So with that, I would like to make good on the idea that we want to open up this conversation as quick as we can. So great, if you could come up to the mic, and people have additional questions, if we could get on if there are lines behind the 2 mics.
I wasn't told I'd have to use
if you
the
feel
microphone.
comfortable, if you could just tell us who you are and where you live, if possible, that'd be great.
Yeah, I wasn't told I was going to have to use a microphone. Sorry about that. My name is Jason Hamill. I'm a resident of Shelburne. And my question is for you. I'm sorry, I didn't get your rank. I don't know if you're a chief or... Chief, there was a shooting, I think it was last year, and it was said in the papers that it was related to gang activity, not just gang activity, but out-of-state activity. Do you feel that that's a precursor to a bigger problem, an isolated incident? Is there anything that you guys are doing to specifically target that?
Neither heroin nor prescription opioids nor fentanyl are produced in Vermont. So every time someone ingests any type of opioid, it is here from a location out of the state. So no matter what route it takes, opioids do come to Vermont from out of state. The shooting you were referring to is a homicide of a person who was involved in trafficking both heroin and crack cocaine. He was from Brooklyn, New York. His killers have been apprehended. No, we don't see an increase in the violence necessarily related to heroin, but it is the case that both the pills and the heroin itself are coming from places like the Bronx and Brooklyn and Boston, Detroit, Philadelphia, and we have a narcotics detachment that actively investigates those cases. They work with the state's attorney and the U.S. attorney, and they make arrests. Those arrests are public information. We discuss them with the media, but that is a part of our strategy. One of our principles is to be certain about the fact that if you're bringing opioids into Vermont with the active intent of victimizing the populace and creating addicts, that law enforcement and arrest is an answer to that.
As we take the next question, I just want to make sure everyone who's standing in the back knows that there are many more seats upstairs if you're interested. Sir, welcome.
Hi, my name is Justin England. I've suffered from a continuous sinus infection for the last 4 years. I just got a referral to the pain clinic at UVM Medical Center. Throughout this time, the only thing that's actually helped with allowing me to function normally without continual severe chronic pain has been marijuana tincture. I tried it in the fall for the first time in my life at the age of 35 with the support of my doctors. And if I can't, I'm also allergic to all over-the-counter pain medication, aspirin, naproxen sodium, acetaminophen, all of them. What is being done to decriminalize and increase the access to medicinal marijuana for chronic pain patients and other people that need it? Because right now it's been extremely difficult to get final approval since my pain is not intractable, because I can hold a job and I can leave the house. I'd like to know what alternatives do I have so I don't have to get a prescription for an opiate.
Great, thank you, Justin. Selena, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, so the Senate, the Vermont Senate, is working on a bill right now that would really expand our medical marijuana program to address just those kinds of issues. There is also a bill that's been moving through my committee in the House of Representatives, which is the Judiciary Committee, that is a pretty modest marijuana legalization bill. We haven't voted it out yet. I'm not sure what the status of that bill is going to be, but both of those things I think would go a long way to addressing the situation you've talked about. And for states that have legalized marijuana, there is some evidence that opioid overdose fatalities have gone down in some of those states. So I'm with you. I do think the legislature is trying to move on that this year, and if you want to get more details, those pieces of paper I mentioned have my contact info out there on the table, and I'd be happy to follow up with more detail with you and make sure you know how to advocate in the Senate for what you think we need.
Go ahead. Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Marie Agan, and I'm a toxicology scientist at a local newly acquired drug testing laboratory here in Burlington, Vermont. We are available and willing to aid in addressing this ongoing crisis. We have the unique opportunity of sharing data, trends, and the ability to coordinate with all parties involved, including the state, city, law enforcement, providers, treatment centers, and even patients. We believe in compassionate action through scientific leadership. Please tell us how, as a private industry, we can be involved in this epidemic.
That's great. We appreciate that and the offer of additional data, and I think we'd love to get you involved in this community stat effort right away. That's Burlington Labs or?
We're actually BLA partners. We've been newly acquired.
Okay, BLA partners. Great. Well, I appreciate you coming and offering that, and we will follow up with you if you maybe could. Jordan from my office and Red at the back, maybe you could give her your contact information to make sure we follow up. Thank you. Sir.
My name is Bill Gavin. I live in St. Albans, but I work here in Burlington. And the question I have is, what kind of youth outreach is part of this initiative and youth education? I work with a lot of young people as part of my job, and just curious as to, though I appreciate this as a disease, what I guess moral element or ethical element is part of this discussion with young people today, showing them the consequences of the decisions that they make. I guess I just don't know across the board what's going on. Having been a victim of a house break-in since I've moved here a year and a half ago, just as far as the real life consequences and just what kind of outreach is part of this initiative. So.
Great. Appreciate the question. And I think it's a critical one, and let's kick it around a little bit. I mean, I think first thing I just want to hit right off the bat there is while certainly I think going forward a key element of the solution is making sure everyone is aware of the role of their personal decisions in this. I think it really would be wrong to take that and translate it into a sense that people who are suffering, everyone who's suffering from addiction, really made a mistake on their part and is responsible for what's happened. Clearly part of why we are where we are is that as a society, we got way too comfortable with the prescribing of these powerful painkillers. I mean, pharmaceutical opioids are molecularly almost indistinguishable from heroin. These are very powerful drugs that are highly addictive, and for a while there, as a country, we really kind of lost sight of that, and we thought these drugs could be used safely, well beyond what they could be used safely. So many people who are suffering from addiction today were simply following the advice of their doctor and the sort of general sense of the culture without, and I think would be wrong to blame them. At the same time, I think you're absolutely right that to keep from getting deeper into this crisis, we need everyone to understand what the consequences of their actions is. We have Margot Austin here with us tonight, who has been a counselor at the Burlington High School for years and is here to share with us some thoughts on prevention and how to speak to kids and young people about prevention issues, and we're going to have her speak further later in the program, but Margo, maybe you could just quickly address the gentleman's question about what you say to young people today. And if you could give the 30-second version, we'll give you the 5-minute version later.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Again, I'm Margo Austin, and certainly you can get in contact with me at Burlington High School. So prevention is key to this. I really had a great conversation this morning, and I appreciated your efforts in thinking about the prevention. And I think when it comes to youth, I think we are sending a lot of really, I think a lot of mixed messages as a culture and a lot of messages that need to be corrected. And so education can't be understated enough in how important it is. And that prevention, frankly, has really been shortchanged financially and otherwise. I'm a student assistance professional. And over the last 5 to 7 years, there's a lot fewer of us, a lot fewer broad-based prevention focus. And so I would encourage people to really contact your legislators and think about with that piece, because we can't just do prevention and for first grade or second grade and then go, we've done prevention, we can stop now. It's an ongoing issue. And the good news, I just want to say really quickly, and I'll talk more later, I think it's really important to dispel the myth that at the high school where I work, the good news, bad news, depending on how you look at it, when I meet with young people and talk to them about their own substance use, opiates is a very, very rare conversation. That's really important for you to understand that this is not something on a daily basis. So what I am concerned about, though, is the ongoing use of marijuana, alcohol, and tobacco. And there absolutely is a brain-way connection. The brain does not parcel off and say, good drugs over here, bad drugs over here, and the two shall never meet. And I think that a lot of people are very confused about that. So again, you can contact me at the high school, and we do have a prevention coordinator, and we also have Mariah from the Burlington Partnership for Healthy Communities right here, and we're happy to talk more about youth programs. Thank you.
Go ahead, Kathy.
Good evening. My name is Kathy Aikman. I just wanted to mention that as part of the Alliance, and I'm happy to talk more about this later if people have specific questions, we do have an action team that's working on prevention efforts. Mariah, who is mentioned, is one of our co-chairs, as well as Heather Danis, who works at Vermont Department of Health. If folks are interested in becoming and want to be part of that conversation and help us move that, move some actions forward as far as prevention, there is an action team meeting regularly on that topic. Good question. So you can Google Chittenden County Opioid Alliance, and my contact information is there. I can also leave, I'll write my information on the back table that's outside, along with the information that you have if people are interested.
Great. I've kind of lost track of where we were. You're here. Okay, great.
I'm just going to face everyone first. My name is Alicia, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. To me, that means that I haven't had to pick up a drink or a drug in 3.5 years. And I think that's... Thank you. You're clapping for yourselves because it was a community effort. And I just want everyone to see my face, because the face of addiction isn't anonymous, so I don't think the face of recovery should be. So not to be rude, I'll turn this way now. I just want to speak a little bit about what worked for me really quickly. When I was ready, I wasn't even ready. I didn't want to go to treatment. I didn't want to seek help. I was pretty much half comatose, and someone told me, you need to go to treatment. And I just wanted them to basically be quiet because I wanted to go to sleep, so I said yes. Within 15 minutes, I was on the phone with a treatment center, and within 4 hours, I was in a detox. I was living in Rutland, Vermont at that time, but unfortunately, that treatment center was in Worcester, Massachusetts. So thank God for that quick treatment. While I was there, it was probably going to be a quick spin dry, the type of thing where you go in for 4 to 7 days, and then you're out doing the same thing. I was lucky enough to be blessed with MRSA, which kept me in a hospital for 3 months. From there, I waited. It's a blessing in disguise, believe me. So then I had to wait 30 days to get to a treatment center here in Vermont. And when I finally got there, I was connected with services like the Howard Center. I went to the Oxford House, which is a sober house for women. And, I got connected with the Turning Point Center, as well as I had second chance hiring at a local lab. And so I think one thing that I just want to hear you talk more about, or maybe just think about, is you did speak about the quickness of care, that quick turnaround, but also the continuation of care beyond just MAT-assisted therapy. So.
Great, thank you, Alicia. Thank you for sharing that, and great question. I think as your story points out, one thing that we're very focused on in this county right now is and one of our principles is the need for people who are ready for help, or like you're describing, not quite ready for help, whatever circumstance it is that puts them in a place where they should be going into treatment. We need to have the facilities in place to provide medically assisted treatment, and today we do not have that. As the Chief Staff pointed out, we have made real progress on that. We are hopeful that the next sort of step in that is the opening of a new hub in St. Albans that will take some of the pressure off the Chittenden County hub that is causing the continuing wait times of 3 months or more. That next hub is supposed to be open in May, and many of us are eagerly looking forward to that. But your question goes beyond that. You're asking what else beyond medically assisted treatment should we be offering, and how do we transition people out of medically assisted treatment into other forms? I think there's so much focus on medically assisted treatment because it is one area where we have good data showing that clearly people who are in medically assisted treatment suffer fatal overdoses at a lower rate than people who are addicted and not in medically assisted treatment. What additional goals we should have, though, is something that I think many of us are just starting to grapple with. And Steve, do you want to speak to that further?
Thank you for your story. And so I think you bring up a great point. So the pill that you're taking or not needing to take is only one part of a full spectrum of treatment. And so I would say, and I've been saying this a lot, that the only way we're going to solve this problem, we're not going to prescribe our way out of it. We're not going to arrest our way out of the problem. We're not going to legislate our way out of the problem. We're going to need a full spectrum approach to how we're going to face this. So when people are in treatment and getting the services they need, some of them will need ongoing lifetime counseling, some won't. But what they will need is good jobs, good housing, be accepted back in the community, become productive again. Because if you're not a full productive member of society, the things that led you to potentially becoming addicted are still present in your life. So the first steps of that, I do believe, are getting everybody treated who needs it, getting people a pill who need it right now so they're not dying of overdose. And then through your primary care office and your community, getting everything you need to step back in and be a successful member of your community. And that's why it's so impressive for everyone to be here, because I think it's going to take every person here plus all of your friends and neighbors to solve this problem. So I don't know if that's the answer you're looking for, but I think that part of it is the doctor part, the pill. Part of it is the other parts that they can help you with in there, addiction therapy, behavioral health, mental services that you mentioned. But then also it's getting back into society.
Thank you for sharing that story. To answer your question and also make a point based on something you said, our citywide opioid policy coordinator is a person who spent over 3 decades working with people in various phases of addiction and recovery. And when we were we couldn't necessarily have afforded to hire a doctor to do this job, but one of the reasons why we thought we didn't want someone who was a cop or a doctor was because of their narrow focus. We wanted somebody who wouldn't just look at it medically or police-wise, but someone who understood the need for housing, the need for peer support, the need for employment afterwards. And so we took somebody with a real broad and deep social service background to start, like the mayor acknowledged, we're just beginning to grapple with that. But the way we're grappling it is by trying to find people with lived experience in dealing with it and bringing the government and folks up to speed. And you said that it was a blessing in disguise that you were laid up in bed sick for 30 days, right? 3 months. 3 months, 90 days. And so, I mean, the mayor and I discussed this. We call it, I got to bring this up. Opioids are like the sirens in the Odyssey. Remember the sirens? If you heard them singing, you had to jump overboard and dash yourself on the rocks. There was no way around it. And the only way Odysseus was able to survive hearing the siren's call is by lashing himself to the mast. And we have a woman here saying that one of the only ways she was able to survive is by lashing herself to a bed for 90 days. And yet we have a population that is stuck and nowhere to go. That's our incarcerated population. And a lot of them have landed where they are because of their addiction. And yet while they're sitting there with nowhere to go, we don't seize on the opportunity to provide treatment. And I think that if, police chiefs are judged by their bosses by how well they keep down the crime rate, if we were able to judge our prisons by how they in turn lower the incarceration rate, if that was the goal for promotion or continued employment in corrections, you'd see a lot more treatment in prison immediately. So I think your point inadvertently underscores Selena's point about the need for treatment in prison, because like being in a hospital bed, there's nowhere to go, and it's a real golden opportunity.
Thanks, Chief.
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Matthew Cagle. I have lived experience with this disease, not specifically with heroin addiction, but alcoholism. I have seen a lot of people pass away, people that I know, a best friend, a lot of people I've gone to school with. I mean, I'm sure we all have. I've studied this a lot, looking at what other communities, other countries have done to combat the issues of addiction in general. We see heroin addiction, it's a terrible drug. It doesn't take long. But what I see in some European countries and countries that are kind of following suit around the world is what we do here, first of all, is we label people as criminals for being involved. And I think what other countries have done, one specifically that seems to be a pioneer is Portugal in decriminalizing all drugs. And what I saw in learning and research is that within less than a handful of years, that crime had been reduced by 50%. So when I look at things like that, it really makes me take a look at I think it's unanimous, we need treatment, but, and care for these people that come to addiction, but I think when we look at the criminalization of being involved with this drug, I think on every level, it consumes people, whether someone has never used heroin and they sell it, or if we sit here and just watch it happen. So I think to really take a deeper look on how we label people as criminals. And any comments on that, please?
Great. So I think maybe a couple of us want to respond to that. Yes, thank you for raising it. I think you've already seen in this state a pretty dramatic shift in the way we think about the criminalization of the drug trade. Certainly that's been quite dramatic with respect to marijuana. Decriminalization, we actually formally have called it, passed decriminalization bills and conduct practices very differently. What Burlington is doing with respect to the opioids is also articulated in one of our principles. If I can find it. People, what we're saying explicitly in this draft policy and seeking your feedback on is that police should give amnesty to users seeking help for their addiction and send them to treatment. We essentially are already practicing that way to a large degree, and maybe Chief, you'd like to speak to that further and the thinking behind that principle, and then you want to do that first, and then we'll have Selena speak to the sort of broader policy question that Matt raised.
Yeah, so one of the primary focuses of the Burlington Police is to distinguish between addicts who are committing a crime nominally by possessing the drug to use, and then people who are profiting by running an enterprise that brings the drug into the state. I have my analyst in the background, I'll follow up on this, but we make very few to no simple possession arrests in and of themselves. An example of a time we would is, for example, when somebody is shooting up in a car with their kids in the back, we will arrest them in that case because it's proximate to the child endangerment. But we don't have officers that go out on the street looking for people possessing small amounts of heroin. We don't make non-incidental, just focused arrests for people possessing small amounts of heroin. And when we do encounter those people, we have a huddle with our opioid policy coordinator, with the Rapid Intervention Community Court, or with Officer Beck at Drug Court to see what it would take to divert them into treatment. There's at least, since Jackie came on, I think I can count on both hands, at least 10 people who, for minor, even serious offenses actually, where they've had accompanying thefts or human trafficking, we've sent them as addicts directly to treatment rather than even charge them with anything. So, I'll be candid in saying I don't think, knowing what I know about Portugal, and I'd like to have some more research, I don't want us to have the economy or the social structure of Portugal right now. I don't think it's a good model. I honestly just differ. I don't think it's worked for them. But I do think that everything that you see that we're doing is trending towards acknowledging this as a medical problem and a chronic addiction problem and not as a crime problem. And I think Principle 5, which is addicts who want help should get treatment and not be charged with a crime, I think really honors the principle that the gentleman who made that comment brought up.
So I was just going to report, I serve on the Judiciary Committee in the House, and we actually have been looking at a bill for most of this session, H-167, that would have kind of altered the possession amounts for heroin in particular that led to felony charges. So we're trying to look at if there was a way to bring possession amounts more in line with what someone might possess for personal use. That bill wasn't able to, and we don't have full agreement, I don't think, on that bill on this panel, but that bill didn't make it out of committee that way. But what we did vote out today for 167 is actually a broad study that would look at national and international models like Portugal and how they are handling, kind of delineating this difference between what is a possession of not just heroin, but a sort of illegal substance that aligns with personal use and perhaps substance abuse and even addiction versus a more criminal intent towards sale or distribution. So we will be getting that study back in the fall, and the idea of the committee is that we're going to take a broader look at that next year in the biennium, so that those models are very much on our minds in that committee, and I really appreciated that question, and hope I'll be here in a year with more information about some of that research that you were saying you feel like we need more of.
And just to bring one thing into perspective, because I'm sincere in saying we are not out there looking to arrest drug addicts for the sake of arresting drug addicts. Is when that bill came up, we looked at the spread just in Burlington. I can't vouch for the rest of the state, but between where it becomes a felony now and where the bill would have made it a felony, it's basically a manifold spread in the weight. And we'd found what was the time period, Eric, that we looked at? In the last year, in that gap, there were 4 arrests total. One was expunged, the charges were dropped, one is still being adjudicated, and 1 person has died of an overdose. So what we were talking about, that would have, this is not saying the bill isn't a worthwhile avenue of research. I'm saying that the swing that you were talking about would have affected 4 people. So we're not out there like on the prowl for people addicted to drugs looking to just simply take them into custody.
Although I will just note another thing we're talking about in that committee is geographic justice. So while that might be your approach in Burlington, that might be a really different approach for another municipality in the state.
And I just want to speak to that really briefly because the chief mentioned the rapid intervention program in our office, and I just want to point out for people that don't know what that is that it's an alternative justice program where possession charges and thefts or any charges coming in that are clear that the person committed that crime to feed their addiction or the possession charges in themselves all go to that program and they're not charged. And the coordinator, Emmett Helrick, will work with them to get them into treatment or get them housing or get them services that they're lacking. And if they don't follow through on those things, then we charge the case, but they are not immediately charged. And that's almost every possession case that comes into our office.
Welcome. Thank you.
Hi.
Thanks
Hi. My name is Jackie. And one thing I want to make sure we don't lose sight of, because I see it lacking and it's become a real problem, is the fact that there are many, many, many people that currently use pain medications legitimately, responsibly, and are not addicts. And what has happened to them is they've been demonized and politicized, and their treatment has become almost as politicized as abortion rights. And it's interfered with patients' ability to get proper care. We all know that the Vermont study that was done showed that the illegal use of medications are not from patients. Patients are not the source of the black market. Also, studies show that at least 75% of people who do abuse narcotics do so from pills that were not prescribed to them. So one of the things I wanted to ask about is, at the pain center, patients are put through a lot of humiliations as though they are criminals. Urine tests, pill counts. There's even been a PA advocating for at-home random urine tests and pill counts. These are working people, productive citizens. They're not criminals. There's a lack of care because it's been so politicized, no doctors want to treat. We are the 21st century lepers, and it's really been harmful. So the other thing is I want to know what's going to be put in place to protect patients' privacies. There are pharmacies where you cannot fill prescriptions unless you're willing to put your personal information into their POS software, where any employee has that information, including your address, prescription, So for privacy and also just patient rights and right to access medical care that's proper.
Thank you for the question. I think it's a critical question as we, if you start to study this issue, you realize there's a very long history to the relationship between the country and opioids. And we've really been on a dramatic pendulum swinging back and forth from, rampant use of, and I may get part of this wrong, and there will be, I don't want to spend too much time on the history of it, and that we have a whole nother event scheduled for April 4th where we're going to read a book, and it's part of something called the Mayor's Book Group, and we're going to read this book, Dreamland, and have the author here in this room on April 4th and really get into the history there. But the brief history, as I understand it, is, there was widespread use of morphine as a painkiller in World War I, and a brief period where we saw it as this miracle drug that could be really effectively used to treat pain, and then saw a huge number of addicts created by that use of the drug, and there was a severe reaction in the other direction that carried for a long time until the 70s and the 80s, and there developed this belief that that the pendulum started to swing back the other way and went too far. I think most of us agree that the pendulum went too far the other way, as really what has turned out to be, too much was read into very small studies that said you could use you could treat pain without fear of addiction. We know that's not the case now, and clearly the pendulum is swinging quickly back in the other direction. I do think those of us working on this issue, certainly the way I see it, I'm highly aware that for many patients, opioids are a very valuable tool. For many people suffering from acute pain, there is nothing else that can provide the kind of relief that they need. Certainly for many patients at the end of life, concerns about addiction should not be secondary to concerns about how we relieve symptoms in the final stages of life. And I think I appreciate you being here tonight to raise that critical perspective. It's certainly something on my mind as we grapple with this, and I think it shows that we really need a thoughtful, varied response to get this right. I don't know, Steve, you probably have a lot to add to that.
So thank you for your comments. As you state, there are many people in the state of Vermont who suffer from chronic painful conditions and are appropriately using meds that are prescribed. We do have a pain center at the medical center, and we're undergoing the process right now of revamping that and adding some more options for people with chronic pain. I would add that there are people with chronic pain who've never ever misused one of their pills, but there are other people who not only have a painful condition but also have an addiction issue with the medication, and sometimes sorting those out are not always easy. We're being legislated now to some of the things that you've mentioned, and I will say that it can be done respectfully. I think it can be done in teamwork with your physician to make it the least intrusive possible, but I don't think any of that stuff is going away. So I think having conversations with your provider about how can you fit this into what you need to manage your chronic painful condition is important. The last thing I do want to say, though, is that we do know that even people who take chronic prescription opiates above certain doses have an increased risk of death. And so we've really become aware now that we have to be smart with our patients about how we prescribe these to make sure they're on the safest dose they can be on to manage their condition.
Right. No, I totally get that. But it's just the question is that it's become very political, and a lot of the treatments are starting to be based on politics. And, you're on if you're a high dose patient, you got to be reduced or whatnot. And so what is your answer for patients who do responsibly use medications, do have chronic pain issues, in this type of atmosphere? Like I said, there's the lack of privacy, the lack, and having to go back and forth for all these different tests and whatnot.
So I'll take the first part of what you said. So there's very, very good evidence that above certain doses of opiates and opiates in combination with other medications like benzodiazepines, that people who are taking those combinations or over certain doses are at high risk for death. So it's clear to us now that it's in the patient's best interest to get their dose down to the safest level we can. That's number one. In terms of protecting your patient information and so on, all providers will completely agree that's important. We want to treat all patients with dignity and respect and manage their conditions. There are things in medicine now that are being legislated, and we can fight about whether that's good or not, but it's happening to us. So I think we just have to work together to make an individual treatment plan to best meet patients' needs.
Will you have patients involved on these boards so that they can look out for privacy needs? So that when decisions are made, you do have patient input? I mean, having to put your personal information in a point-of-service software is a little over the top.
I think it's a great suggestion and a really valuable service you provide by being here tonight. Certainly, you know, the initiative that we're working on that maybe, you know, kind of is close to the area you're talking about is we are working for greater transparency into the system. I will tell you, there is a lot of attention in those conversations about how we protect patient information. So I think that perspective is very alive in these policy discussions, and frankly, sometimes frustratingly alive. We worry, you know, the chief and I spend more of our time frustrated that our concerns over privacy are actually getting in the way of taking steps that might save lives. But your presence here tonight and your words, I think, are really helpful to us as we're working on this to remind us of the importance of that and how, you know, it comes down to real issues for real people, and where there are opportunities to involve individuals with that perspective. I think that's a point well taken, and we should work to find them. I hope you'll leave your name as well with and contact information with Jordan over here in red, as if you do want us to contact you potentially for future involvement. Thank you. Sandy, welcome.
So, hello. Okay. So my name's Sandy, and I've lived in Burlington for about 20 years. Most rewarding experience in my post-college career has been I worked with a private investigations firm that specialized in mitigation, and so I've read through thousands of medical documents about what addicts go through on a day-to-day basis, their treatment, et cetera. And so I wasn't surprised with the rise in overdose deaths, but we also shouldn't be surprised in the rise of their children being in state care and DCF custody as well. And I believe in the principle of if we don't pay now, we will pay later. These are children that have been exposed to severe trauma and will grow up to have mental health ailments of their own. And so I'd like to ask how we as a city and we as a state are going to combat that future cost.
It's a great question, Sandy, and I don't know if I have the full answer to it. I will tell you, it is one of the statistics that we're tracking is the number of, and we're trying to track better, is the number of kids who are ending up in the care of the state as a direct result of the opioid crisis. I think we believe that the vast majority of children in state custody are there in one form or another because of the opioid crisis, and we've seen those numbers spiking in recent years, and it is one of the things that I believe we have committed to having as soon as we can some kind of dashboard out for the public to see how we are doing in real time with updated information with this crisis. I think that would be a great one to include. Your question is, how are we going to make sure those kids who are victims of this are properly cared for down the road? And that is it's a huge issue. I don't know, maybe Sarah, if you can, or the chief, if you can speak, or Selena, if anyone can speak better to that system, which is not a municipal system, but is a key system in this response and has been part of this community stat effort. We are leading. Maybe just let me say one moment about community stat, and I'll hand it over. What community stat is in this room once a month. We get together, I think it's more than 36 agencies to look at these statistics like the slides you saw, and we're trying to expand that all the time, and to look at specific cases of individuals who are falling through the cracks in the system, and try to get all of these different agencies to share an understanding of what the problem is and how we work better together using our existing resources. That is what Jackie is tasked with coordinating. Eric, who's been pointed out at the back, is one of the analysts who helps out with that effort. We also have Samuel Francis Faith, who's here in the front and is an analyst with CCOA, who also is a key part of those presentations. And the child service agencies are very much at the table, and we are trying in real time to grapple with their challenges as part of this. With that said, Steve.
So it's a great question, and I'd just like to say I think there's really two parts to that. I think part one is getting those parents into treatment. Most all those parents want to be in treatment. They want to not be in the car injecting heroin. They want to get medication so they can have their families at home with them. So part one, I think we can mitigate part of this by getting everyone treated the day they need it. Part two is there's actually pretty good data. What you're talking about is adverse childhood events. And that these kids who suffer these adverse childhood events, if you can get them high quality counseling at a young age, so behavioral health and stuff like that, you can mitigate some of the long-term lifetime effects of these events. We know that if you have more than 4 of them before the age of 7, you have a very high incidence later in life of having all kinds of problems. There's good data, some of it being done at UVM by Dr. Hudziak, showing that intervention at a young age makes a huge difference. So I think part one, let's get all those parents into treatment so they can be home taking care of their kids, and the kids don't have to go into child care or be taken away from their parents. And part two, the kids that we pick up in screening or we know have had serious events happen to them, get them great counseling at a young age. And I will tell you, Vermont has a shortage right now of good behavioral health treatment for children. But to your point, investing in that now will probably save us huge issues later on. So I think it's a great point.
I'll just say few quick policy things that I'm aware of that are happening at the state level. One is we just passed out a bill again today out of the Judiciary Committee that really seeks to expand the treatment court model statewide. Right now it's, again, to this idea of geographic justice. There's one in Chittenden County, there's a handful of others throughout the state, but this could potentially be an intervention to allow more temporary custody kinds of situations, and I know that's something the judicial branch is really working on as well. There is a bill that Dr. George Till, who's also a representative from Jericho, introduced on adverse childhood experiences and how to start addressing them from a policy framework. I know a little less about that bill and where it's at right now, but it's been a big topic of conversation actually in the legislature as people learn more and more because of some of the great research in particular that's happening in the state about this. So people are starting to wake up to knowing that this needs to be part of our framework in addressing this.
And once a month, the Burlington Police Department's domestic violence officer, who also deals with DCF issues, meets with DCF and other stakeholders to look at the 10 most vulnerable families in Burlington, whether it's from domestic violence or drug use or both, and they're often very intertwined, to come up with specific plans to deal with the vulnerabilities in those households. And 10 doesn't sound like many, but there's two things. Number one, there's not hundreds of them in a town this size. There's dozens, and 10 is a substantial amount. And the models of care and the plans that are made for those 10 are applicable to as general models to the rest. So we do that all the time. The second thing is we've seen people deeply in the throes of addiction. They're not in their right mind. They're not thinking about the welfare of their kids. But if you get them to a point, even a few days into detox or out of, whether it's jail or a hospital bed or being locked in their own mother's bedroom for a few days, when they have a little bit of sobriety, the first thing they think of is their kids. We've seen that time and time again. And once they get to that point, we need the treatment, like Dr. Leffler said, to immediately come and follow it up. And the last thing is, it's never, in my opinion, it's never too young to talk to your kids are never too young to talk to about opioids. Kids are extremely intelligent. They understand death, even though we don't want to think they do. They understand mortality. They see people on the street struggling, and they know that those people are going through something different than a caring mom or dad is going through. And for us to make believe that they're too young to talk to when really they're seeing things in pretty obvious ways, I think is a mistake. We all need to figure out when our kids are old enough to have this conversation. My son is 9 now, my older one. I've been talking to him about opioids since he was 7. Taking walks in the woods and really getting it out there. And can I guarantee he'll be immune to it? No, but I think that I'm building up a resistance over years, because when he walks down Church Street and he sees folks in the throes of addiction, like, he knows there's something wrong. So for me to deny that that's happening is to do him a disservice, especially in a crisis like we're having today.
we're going to, in a couple minutes, we're going to shift gears and expand on the chief's points about how you talk to your kids and prevention efforts. I think we probably have time for a couple more general questions, and then we're going to kind of shift gears. So just to give people in line a heads up on that, but we're going to get through as much as we can. Hi.
Hi, I'm Jess Kell, and I'm the parenting coordinator for Kids Apart, which is a lunch program based inside the Chittenden Regional Correctional Facility. So my comment really is also about the impact on the children in our community whose parents are experiencing addiction. And I'm looking at the principles in here, which are wonderful, but there's nothing really specific to the family-centered approach to treatment. I see those women who are detoxing and missing their children. That's what I've been doing every day for the last 9 years, and absolutely they're asking about their children even before they're detoxed. That's a #1 priority for parents when they're separated from their children. A lot of people don't, especially mothers, single mothers, let's say, don't look for treatment because they don't have child care. If they go into treatment, or if they tell their PO that they have relapsed, are they going to go back to jail? Are they going to lose their Section 8? Who's going to take care of their children? If their children go into DCF custody, what's going to be they know what the end result of that will be. So I think there's also those issues of treatment and all of the supports that need to go along with it for families, because we're not just talking about young people who are using drugs and becoming addicted, or single people, but families and how you keep a family together. So I would love to see more highlight on those specific needs and on the needs for treatment that addresses the whole needs of a family. So programs like Lund that a woman can participate in with her children and not be separated from them, as well as the long-term, all of those long-term pieces, and also taking into consideration that's not just what happens at the time of arrest, and it does sound like BPD is addressing those issues, but we also have what happens when somebody is already under DOC supervision or already has criminal justice involvement, and they have a relapse that puts them back incarcerated, and what the effects are there. So, thank you.
Thank you. Raises a really good kind of process point. I want to make sure everyone is aware before they leave. I see we're starting to lose some people. We really do want feedback on these principles, and I think I got some sense of the kind of addition you're talking about there. If you want to give us more specific feedback, just a couple options for doing that is, first of all the principles are up on the board at the back, and I think we have pens. Jordan's holding pens, and if you have feedback for any of the specific principles and you want to write it up there before you leave, you're explicitly invited to do so. You can also communicate with us through other channels, maybe one of the easiest being an email to our office. If you just send an email to mayor@burlingtonvt.gov, we will take that into account as we're trying to finalize these principles with the City Council in the weeks ahead. Welcome.
Thank you. So my name is Janet Kahn. I live here in Burlington. I teach out of the College of Nursing and Health Sciences, and I sit on the Governor's Healthcare Workforce Working Group. And I'm one of the few people working at the medical center whose badge says Integrative Practitioner. I want to commend the recommendations that are coming from the legislature, coming from the hospital and other places about prescription, about controlling opioid prescription. They fall in line with the kinds of recommendations coming out of the American College of Physicians and the Joint Commission, the kind of guidelines they're giving to hospitals and physicians. Those tend to go further and recommend not just curtailing or trying to limit the opioid prescription, but recommending that there are other things that can be used first or used with opioid prescription. And they specifically mention things like massage and acupuncture and mind-body medicine and osteopathic manipulation and things like that to control pain. I think there are 3 distinct phases in treating this epidemic. They're maybe not so distinct, they're maybe overlapping, but there certainly is a huge prevention phase, and that's what we look at with controlling that. And there also is an acute withdrawal, an acute treatment phase, and then there is the rest of everybody's life phase. And what do we do about that? And I think there are aspects of integrative healthcare. I think there are certain modalities that can be helpful in each of those phases. The problem with even the places like the Surgeon General or like the Joint Commission that are recommending what can be used is they don't say what can be used when, and they don't tell any physician who's sitting there with a patient who would be good to do that. I mean, not just which kind of provider, but who those are in your community. They're not mostly employed by the hospital. They're certainly not part of the blueprint for health community, health teams that are supposed to be supporting primary care practices. And I think that one of the great things about a city as small as Burlington and a state as small as Vermont is that we could actually organize that. There are many licensed healthcare professionals in those professions in this state who would be willing to step forward. There are professional associations we could be calling on. There's some education in each direction that would need to be done. And I think we could get that organized. So I'm just going to say that and say I'd be happy to work with the mayor's office, or I'd be happy to work with the legislature, or with your role, yes, Jolinda, or whoever else, to begin doing that mutual education and really getting a very organized system so that it's not just, you ought to do this, good luck.
Thanks so much. That's awesome. You've come forward and made that offer. We're definitely, from the mayor's office, going to take it up and follow up with you in that I couldn't agree more that I think that's one of the ways we've lost our way here. And one of the things that comes out in this book that we're going to have this other event on is how, as a country, we used to do much more in terms of alternative pain treatments. We had these community clinics that more than 1,000 of them around the country, and those have largely withered and died in the opioid era. We've got to reverse that and give people alternatives to opioids for treating pain. I know that Steve agrees with that. It was one of the reasons I was excited to have him be part of this panel. Do you want to say anything further?
So the University of Vermont Medical Center is committed to integrative health. We have a task force right now. We have a committee that's working with the College of Nursing and Allied Health, with the medical school and the medical center to provide alternate therapies to our patients. And also, just as important, to have our learners understand there are other options for treating pain. And I can just tell you, just personal experience, we're starting to make a difference because I just recently was working, we had a person come in who had chronic rib pain from a chronic health condition, and I called one of my pain docs who I was sure was going to come down and do a big procedure, a rib block or something. He said, I think acupuncture would be great for this gentleman. And we were able to get him into an acupuncture appointment the next day. And I can tell you I've been doing this for 24 years, and that's the first time ever that kind of conversation happened. So I do think it's starting to catch. I think as we teach more of our learners about it, as we have more options for our patients when they're coming out of operations and stuff like that, we will see more and more of this happen. And I couldn't agree more that we have the opportunity to study all these things and start to build care pathways to help our patients manage all kinds of painful conditions without just using medication. Thank you.
Great. Well, we'll have one last sort of general question and then shift to the last part of the program here. So, welcome.
Hi. I never dreamed that I would be at a town hall meeting about opioids. And you always think, oh, it's a disease. It's a disease. It's the other person that's getting affected by it. But really, I was a victim of a situation in which a person who was high on opioids operating a vehicle, and he was on a trip, went and visited his supplier, got some heroin and fentanyl and whatever else he purchased that evening, and he had 2 other people in his car with him, and I had 3 other individuals in my car. And he and his party were all high on heroin and fentanyl while he was operating a vehicle. Next thing you know, his vehicle swerves, crosses the double yellow line, and hits my vehicle head on. For the past year, I have been dealing with the aftermath of that, because he died at the scene. His passenger was dead on the scene, but they gave her Narcan and brought her back to life, 2 doses, and then she was brought back to life with broken bones. I have a passenger in my car that's totally paralyzed from that accident. I believe when we say, hey, we see parents shooting up and their kids are in the back seat of a car, we need to do something more to prevent that person that is shooting up from operating a vehicle or machinery or anything else that can harm us. It's not a problem for just the addict. It's a problem for the whole community because we are at risk. You never know who is going to be behind the wheel high or having hallucinations or whatever effects from the drug. I think that if it's good that there is Narcan out there to help the addicts that are overdosing, but once you do it once or twice, we've got to force them to go to treatment, and there needs to be more treatment and not all these wait lists to get into these facilities for help. And I mean, I have been fighting this, I guess, guilt that this guy died. Did I kill him? No, I tried to prevent myself from hitting his car, but there was nothing I could do when we're going head on. And then now I have a friend of mine who's paralyzed, and I think every day, could I have done something different? But I know it's not my fault that this guy had a disease and the drive to get the drug was so big that he didn't care about anyone else. But as a community, if we know people that are like that, we should stop and say, hey, you need help. And I want to know, like we talk about statistics about, you know, how many people die overdose and who's getting help. But what about the people that are victims of this? What about all the crimes that stem from this addiction, from this disease? We don't have that issue with a person who's diabetic.
Thank you. That was incredibly powerful, and it is absolutely one of the reasons that we are here tonight having this conversation is because we believe the collateral damage of these addictions in this community is vast, and maybe we haven't said enough up until this point of the program about that. Absolutely, we are here because homes are being broken into by addicts who are after these drugs. Without doubt, people who are suffering from addiction do great damage to their kids and great damage to their families and the entire community. The overdose deaths is that we do focus on, we see as the tip of the iceberg of the damage in the community that these opioids are causing. They are sort of one of the few clear metrics we have, and there is a dramatic metric, but it should not be lost in that focus on the people who die of overdoses that their addictions is causing vast damage in this community to people who are entirely innocent and faultless, and that's a huge, huge problem. The specific point you raise is one we have started to grapple with that, I wasn't really sure is going to come up tonight, but it's something the Chief and I talk a lot about, and I appreciate you raising it to the attention of everyone that's here tonight, the media and others, is that a huge number of the people that we bring back to life, unbelievably, right, with this this miracle drug of the Narcan, naloxone, about 30% of those people who we bring back to life kind of dust themselves off and get up and walk away from the scene. The last time the community staff met, we looked at the case of one young woman who was brought back to life twice in 2016 by different first responders. and then still overdosed when she, we weren't there the third time. And she's dead. The chief makes the point, and I think it's a very powerful point, that other people who, in our society, who are clearly a threat to themselves or a threat to others, we treat differently. Maybe I should let the chief make this point because he makes it more colorfully than I can. And we don't do that with addicts, and it's an uncomfortable conversation to have. But I think we do need to start having that conversation of what to do when someone is not ready themselves, isn't sick and stuck in bed for 3 months, isn't in jail, but still clearly represents a threat to themselves and a threat to others. Should we be doing more than we're doing today? Do you want to add to that, Chief?
No, I think that there's a tension between two values in Vermont that Vermont has to reconcile if it's going to make progress in this one way or the other. The first is this intense sympathy towards people who are losing grip of the ability to control their own behavior. And we acknowledge that people who are struggling with opioid addiction have lost the ability to control their own behavior. Then in Vermont, I've seen, especially having worked for 2 decades across the lake, Vermont is loath to impose itself as a state institutionally on people who can't control their own behavior. And so what you have is this great reluctance to do forced emergency interventions on people, but then this other acknowledgement simultaneously that there are thousands of Vermonters that are unable to control themselves in a way that will kill themselves and, as our speaker pointed out, kill others. So if there is a lady or gentleman right now who is pointing a knife at his or her own stomach saying, I'm out of my mind, I hear people talking to me, I want to stab myself with this knife and I can't control my own actions, without a doubt, that person would involuntarily be going for quite some time to psychiatric help to get proper containment and evaluation. If you take that knife out of their hand and you fill it with a syringe full of fentanyl and they say, I can't control myself, I'm out of my mind, I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to put this poison in my blood, they fall over, we give them Narcan, and then they go, I'm out of here. And we're powerless to intervene on their behalf. And we're not going to be able to make sense of our approach to opioids in Vermont unless we reconcile our deep commitment to not interfering with people's lives, even if they're unable to control themselves, and then our acknowledgement in our principles. We have legislators, you have doctors, state's attorneys, and mayors saying these are people who are unable to control their actions to the point where they're visiting harm upon everyone. And so if there's one thing that the government is known for, it's occasionally imposing its will, and there's a genuine opportunity here in prisons, in psychiatric facilities, and hospitals to do a little more than just bringing someone back to life and letting them walk away so that they can hit a car head on 2 months later, or inject themselves to the point where they die when no one can revive them 2 months later. And you could see from my very animated tone that, like, we want to save these lives and get out there, and I think we need a little more authority to do so.
So I'm going to talk about a different solution or approach to some of the harm that can come from public drug consumption, particularly in vehicles. And Sarah, maybe you'll want to speak to this too, because I know you have a task force launching. But I have another bill that builds on international models and some models that a number of American cities are now looking at that would allow agencies in the state of Vermont to create what are called safe consumption facilities. So I've heard anecdotally a lot of instances of people who have overdosed in cars, behind the wheels of cars, in cars with children in cars. And we know that people are often traveling really great distances in Vermont from rural areas to procure what they need for their addiction, and then are not able to wait to consume because the addiction is so strong. So a safe consumption facility, what it allows is a place where people can go under medical supervision. They can have access to clean needles. They can have access to Narcan. They can have access to drug treatment referrals and a number of other kind of soft support services, and they can consume drugs on those premises rather than in vehicles, in places that might cause, in situations that might cause harm to other people. And there are about 100 of these sites worldwide. They've been studied really extensively in peer-reviewed medical literature, and again, the results come back that they prevent overdose deaths. There's never been a single overdose death at one of these sites where people are using. They are really effective at getting people into treatment. So detoxification, service use, and treatment use goes way up for clients of these facilities, and injecting goes down over time for clients. And they also really cut down on public drug use and discarded needles in neighborhoods and vicinities that host them, and they do all of that with no uptick in crime. Sorry. Well, it's voluntary, so people who are coming there are coming particularly with that intent. So it's not catching everybody, but all I can tell you is that the science on them are really good, and I think it's something that we should at least be looking at as a potential tool in our toolkit here in Vermont. I know it makes people uncomfortable, but there's hundreds of articles you can read about these things. Seattle is looking at them, California is looking at them, partly because of community concerns around what happens when people are consuming in public places. I worked for quite a while as a city councilor on a task force that looked at just discarded needles in the community and the places they were showing up, schools, trash cans of, local businesses where employees were getting stuck. Anyway, so that's actually, I have a bill in on that, but it's a conversation that's moving forward in a number of ways.
I just have a quick question on what states is showing favorable results.
So there's no American city that has implemented this yet. There's a site called Insight in Vancouver that has been widely studied, and places all around the country. I'm happy to share more information.
Well, I'll just really quickly comment on that. Seattle actually does have them in place. They're currently operating in Seattle, and Ithaca is on the verge of doing it as well. I just wanted to, I do have a commission that's looking at it. It's one of my first initiatives as state's attorney, but I have no opinion about whether or not they're a good idea or not. I just think that we really do owe it to ourselves to look into them and determine whether or not we can do them in our community. And I would just really briefly, I've got to tell you that your comment it strikes me very personally, because that's the dichotomy that we deal with as prosecutors every day, where people, balancing people's addiction versus what they're putting the victims through. Sometimes very, very intrusive and violent offenses that they're committing. And so I appreciate your comment, and it does not go unnoticed.
So, thank you everyone for your questions. If you have questions that didn't get answered tonight, and you would still like answers from people on this panel, and you think I would invite you to use the mayor's office as a hub for trying to push out some information. Please send an email to mayor@burlingtonvt.gov. Call us up at 865-7272, and we'll do our best to answer questions we didn't get to tonight. Before we leave, and I do want to end on time at 8 o'clock, I want to shift gears and talk about two final things. One, we've put up here on the slide a list of the current initiatives that the city is pursuing that are related to this opioid epidemic, many of which we've talked about to some degree tonight. Even if we haven't talked about them. Most of them are somewhat self-explanatory. I'm not going to go through each of them at this point, given the time. I will just point out, because I do think it's an area that we're just starting to talk about as a community. It's going to be a citizen decision in about a year. Chief Locke is leading an effort from Burlington's perspective to bring regional dispatch to Chittenden County. And one of the benefits of that is we believe in many cases we could reduce response times to an emergency by 90 seconds or more, simply by having a better, more efficient system that has less, the 911 system transferring you less times when you call an emergency. So that clearly would have benefits in all sorts of emergencies where every second matters. It also could, in these overdose situations, have an impact. That will be before voters in Burlington and probably other communities next town meeting day, next March. So that's why that's on the list. If people have questions about the others, happy to answer them in another forum. I want to spend our final minutes shifting gears and talking about not what the city is doing, not what the partners up here and in the room are doing, but what individual citizens can do to have an impact on this problem. And we want to speak to that from three perspectives. From the perspective of what you can do as a parent, what can you do as a patient, and Selena's already spoken to this, but what can you do as an interested, concerned, engaged resident as well? Let's start with the parent issue, and that I am sure some of you who come out tonight, like me, feel great urgency to speak to their kids in a new way, to speak to them about this. Chief Del Pozo has mentioned the way in which he speaks to his young kids. I want to turn the floor back over to Margot Austin, who again is a counselor at BHS, for her to give her some advice to us all about how to speak to our children.
Thank you. Hi, everyone, again. So again, Margot Austin, and I'm a licensed alcohol and drug counselor and work as a student assistance program counselor at Burlington High School. And I guess a few things I would just say as we close is that if you are parenting or have teens, is that I think one of the things, if I could wave a magic wand and solve, is that I think a lot of parents I talk to say, oh my gosh, I'm so glad it's only alcohol, it's only marijuana, it's only cigarettes. And I can tell you this, the youth that I work with, so many of them, without more effective interventions and without change, they will definitely end up with problems and addictions with those drugs, or with other substances or a combination thereof. So many students that I work with, polysubstance use is really what we're talking about. I can't stress enough, the brain is not fully developed till 25. So here's a paradigm just to think of before people leave tonight, is I think as adults, we often think experimentation is expected. And one of the things that we need to change as an adult culture is that we can't set that up for kids, that we expect kids to experiment, and then we go, well, what are you doing? And so it's a really tricky thing, and then we can delay the onset. It's the number one thing that we can do. We know the number one thing that drives addiction is that brains are not developed till approximately 25 years of age. And if I have one thing I could do at my job is if we can delay, that's the most important predictor for addiction. And that adolescence, unfortunately, addiction is an adolescent disease. And that I watch a lot of kids that I know, they may not ever get the intervention, they may not get treatment, but they are full-blown dependent on drugs because it will take as little as 5 to 10 weeks when you're an adolescent. So that is the message that I want to send strong and clear, is that we have to stop sending a message to kids that experimenting a little is okay, or I did it when I was a kid and it was fine. I am the youngest of 7 and we had no safety belts, and I don't wish that on anybody. So I am still here. I'm surprised my mother could always count the 7 of us, but just because I'm still here doesn't mean it was the safe and healthy choice. The last thing I will say is around battles to pick, this is the number one battle to pick with your kids. It's not their room, it's not what they're wearing. If you're talking about an issue that will seriously change the course of somebody's life, it's drug, alcohol, and obviously impaired driving, which was illustrated by you, or a combination thereof. Do pick that battle, do get help, don't wait. So I'm happy to help anyone confidentially at Burlington High School. We also have Spectrum Youth and Family Services. I make lots of referrals, and Centerpoint and lots of other providers. So please don't wait. If you have questions, get help, because most people will say they were addicted long before anyone noticed. So thank you.
And then next, I was going to turn the microphone back to Steve to talk about what patients can do to help change the paradigm here.
So we're doing a lot of work right now to make sure that providers have conversation with patients about what they're going to prescribe, what the patient should expect, what the side effects are. We do that for a lot of medicines. I think for many years we've not done a good job of that with opiates in particular. But I would actually ask all of you to have conversations with your providers when you're getting a prescription. Why am I getting this? What's it for? How many pills do you think I'll probably need? Because we actually have some research now that shows amounts for a lot of things. What should I do if I run out? More importantly, what should I do if I have leftover pills? I know that there's many, many households in Vermont right now who somebody got 15 or 20 Percocet because they hurt their ankle really badly and they have 10 left, and most people save them so when they get hurt again they won't have to go to the ER or see their doctor. But those 10 can so easily fall into your children's hands or the neighbor's hands or your cleaning lady's hands. We see it all the time. And then if 6 or 8 kids can all get 10 pills from their parents' medicine cabinet, they can have quite a party. So have a good conversation with your provider. Why am I getting this? Are there other options for me? Is this the best medicine? What should I expect? And we have really, really good information now that shows that the second prescription is when a lot of people get in trouble. So we've started doing a lot of work now with our prescribers saying, look, if you give someone 10 or 15 Percocet because they have legitimate, terrible low back pain from shoveling all this snow, and they come back for a second prescription, that's a really key time. That's a really important time to sit down and have a good conversation with your patient about why do you need another one? We really would expect you to be off. So I would just ask you to please, if your provider's not doing it with you, ask them, ask your family members to make sure they're understanding why they're getting these meds, and just as importantly, what to do with the leftovers. So thank you.
And then, finally, and we've hit this point a couple times, and I don't know if we have too much to add to at this point, but this is a major challenge for us that is not going to end anytime soon. What you've heard about tonight, I think you've heard us touch on the possibility of pushing for change with the state correction system so that people can get treatment while they are in prison. As a concerned, engaged citizen, we could use your help if that sounds like a good idea to you. So far, the legislature is not treating this issue with enough urgency in this current session. There's still time for that to be addressed. I think I had a room, the community staff meeting a few weeks ago. There were 70 people in this room who were really the experts in Chittenden County on this issue. I asked if any of them thought it was a bad idea for people who are incarcerated to get treatment, and not a single person in the room did. The only concern raised by one person working for the state is that there's some cost involved. Well, there's a study that's been done on the cost involved, and it was projected to be, I believe it was about $250,000, right, Selena, to have full treatment in all 7 of our correctional facilities for 120 days. Selena's done some additional work showing she doesn't want to end it after 120 days and doesn't think the cost will be so much more. That is being offered as an objection for something that we think can materially impact what we all agree is basically the largest public health and public safety crisis in the state. Is just amazing to me that can be suggested and that can be slowing this down. If we're serious, as multiple governors have now said about that this is a public health crisis, we've got to find a way for that $250,000 to be there. If this is, we really believe this could have a material impact, as the state's own studies have shown, on the epidemic. So that's one area to think about getting involved in. Again, it's H4. Mentioned in passing, another area for public advocacy around public safety issues in general is it's going to come down to a vote next town meeting today on this regional dispatch issue. Anyone on the panel want to point out something else that is active now that people can get involved in right away, lend their voice to, send a letter to somebody to bring about change here?
Well, I'd say there's numerous bills in the State House, and if you are interested in just hearing about more of them, my contact info is also on that piece of paper out there. I won't try to enumerate them all now, but there are other things moving.
Great. And I would add to that, if you've been energized by this conversation anyway, want to stay involved, this is going to be an active conversation at the state, local, and federal level for a long time to come, and your voice matters in that. People we've heard from tonight will impact how we work on the issue going forward, and that's going to continue to be the case. It is one of the amazing things, as was pointed out earlier about Vermont and about our scale, is that we really can be nimble and responsive to problems. We can get our arms around problems, and we can be leaders, as we have been on issue after issue. This has the potential to be one of those issues that Vermont gets right, that Burlington gets right, but we're going to need the help of all of you in that. Thank you all for coming out and being part of this. I think it's been very important to all of us up here. I hope you found it significant as well, and I have a feeling we're going to be doing this again sometime in the future. Oh, I appreciate it. Last pitch for the book club. If you want more on this type of conversation soon, April 4th here in Contoway's Auditorium at 7 o'clock, we will be meeting and reading the book Dreamland. This is what it looks like. I think we've given out all the free copies that we had tonight, but there are some more at the Fletcher Free Library that you can pick up. And it is, I think, a great read for anyone who wants to know more about how we got to where we are and the potential ways out. Thank you all for being here tonight.